October 22nd, Charles Finney.
When a man determines to obey God, God promises to be with him. Finney led millions of people to Jesus, and his revival meetings changed entire cities. In September 1830, Finney received a desperate invitation from 3 troubled Presbyterian churches. They wanted him to come to minister for a time in Rochester, New York. Finney had no desire to accept the invitation due to the town's immoral reputation and the infighting among the 3 churches. One of them was also without a pastor, and its members feared they would soon be scattered and perhaps annihilated as a church. But after he retired to his room, the Holy Spirit challenged Finney, saying, "Do you shun the field because there is so much that is wrong? If all was right, you would not be needed." Convinced that the Lord was calling him to Rochester, New York, Finney repented of his unbelief. He said, "I felt ashamed to shrink from the work because of its difficulties, and it was strongly impressed upon me that the Lord would be with me, and that was my field." His team arrived in Rochester the next morning, and the first person they encountered was the wife of a prominent lawyer, a woman who was not pleased to see him. She was a very proud woman, and she feared that a revival would interfere with the pleasures and amusements she had promised herself that winter. In response, Finney pressed her to renounce sin, the world, and self, and everything for Christ. Their conversation continued for a considerable time until, finally, under great conviction of sin, the lawyer's wife knelt down to pray with Finney. But even then, Finney battled in prayer for her, holding her up before God as needing to be converted, to become as a little child. I felt that the Lord was answering prayer. When I stopped praying and opened my eyes, her face was turned toward heaven, tears streaming down, and she was praying. From that moment, she was zealous for the conversion of her friends. This remarkable event confirmed that God had indeed sent Finney to Rochester, and it was only the beginning of a mighty move of the Holy Spirit. The Lord was aiming at the conversion of the highest classes of society. My meetings soon became thronged with that class: lawyers, physicians, merchants, and indeed the most intelligent people became more and more interested. They became anxious and came freely to our meetings, and numbers of them came forward and publicly gave their hearts to God. During this time, the Lord led Finney and his team to continually labor in prayer for the work they were doing. The spirit of prayer was poured out powerfully, so much so that some persons stayed away from the public services just to pray. The results were undeniable, for as Finney preached from church to church, revival swept across the whole city. Charles P. Bush, a native of Rochester who came to Jesus during the revival, later remarked, "The whole community was stirred. Religion was the topic of conversation in the house, in the shop, in the office, and on the street. Grog shops were closed. The Sabbath was honored. The sanctuaries were filled with happy worshipers. There was a wonderful falling off of crime. The courts had little to do, and the jails were nearly empty for years afterward."
Keep your business safe online and earn crypto while you do. Use SaferNet. It's a VPN, internet controls, and virus protection all in one place. Monitor your team and keep your data secure with SaferNet.
God tells us in 1 Samuel 15:22, "To obey is better than sacrifice, and to heed is better than the fat of rams." What would it be like to see God touch others powerfully through you? Are you willing to be obedient and allow God to truly use you? Is today the day that you pray and say, "God, your will be done, not mine"? When a man determines to obey God, God promises to be with him.
Hello, man. Chuck Stecker. I'm the Executive Director of A Chosen Generation, intergenerational ministry, helping churches create an intergenerational culture. You know, our story today on this October 22nd is Charles Finney. I love this, and I'd asked for this story because it's in Rochester, New York. Rochester, New York is where my daughter-in-law, one of my daughter-in-laws, is from, grew up, and it just had a special connection there. But I love the story of Charles Finney. There were so many elements, but the very first thing is, it says there that Charles Finney, feeling that he was led or called to go to Rochester. You know, I can tell you there are times when I have a feeling or I feel called and led to go say hello to someone too. Bottom line is, this is a major piece, a major move on his part. And that he was called to go there and he was obedient. Now just start with that, and I'm going to give you several challenges. But the first one is, what is God calling you to that you should be obedient to? Just right there. Just start with that. And then when he gets there, first of all, he's confronted by the lady. And again, we go through this issue where it's not just post-Christian we're living in, or, you know, but it's this anti-Christian because of what we represent. And some people are very angry about that, and they throw words at us and so forth. But it was interesting that I read this story several times. I've read the story of Charles Finney on multiple occasions. It says he spoke with her for an extended period of time. As I recall, or as I have in my sensing, my spirit, he spoke with her with love. You know, the interesting thing in the comparison for me was the woman at the well in John 4. And you know, when Jesus told her, go get your husband, and she says, I have no husband. And he says, well, what you say is right. You don't have a husband, but you've had 5 husbands, and the man you're living with now is not your husband. And she knew in an instant. But I had this image of just the love and the mercy and the grace of Jesus Christ. If I could see his face, and I believe that we've seen his face. So it's, what have you been called to be obedient to that you're not? And then, when confronted, are you able to take the time and say, in love, in grace, this is what I believe and why I believe it? Because really, isn't that what God's calling us to? To know what we believe and why we believe it, and on a moment's notice, when confronted, to be able to share that in love with anyone he's put in our path. So what's God called you to be obedient to? Where do you believe that God is calling you to take your story of what you believe, why you believe it, to someone that needs to hear that? God bless you.